as we build a bit of a waiting list for fail focuses, I thought I'd get a head start on the next one, and hopefully I can help more of you over the next couple of weeks. I know that some of you are waiting and you've been waiting very patiently. We are working through the list, but whether this is your fail focus or not, I hope that this will be helpful to anyone who watches it and give you some insight into the kind of things that you need to be careful of rather, and hopefully overcome the same errors and mistakes. So today's fail focus is going to be on Jessie. Now, Jessie has had a bit of a journey, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. But first, I'm going to say we're going to follow the same structure as we normally do. I'm going to talk about the examiner's feedback. I'm going to talk about Jessie's feedback as a PDI. We're going to look at the scores and generally we're going to be looking for the areas that we've lost a lot of points. So the zeros, if there are any, and the ones. And we're also going to look at the risk management section, because as we know, that is a section in and of itself within the criteria of the Part 3 test. And then I'm going to offer some insight into what I think's gone wrong. But I'm going to add something to this fail focus that I don't normally add. With Jessie's consent, I'm going to tell you that Jessie has had a bit of a journey, and Jessie has failed her Part 3 test 3 times. I'm really pleased to state that Jessie's going to go back round again, and I genuinely believe that Jessie, you will know far more now than you did when you were at this stage in the journey last time. And I genuinely believe that there's a version of this where you are a fully qualified ADI. But when Jessie talked to me about her 3rd attempt and the unsuccessful nature of it, I wanted to look at what had gone wrong. But I also thought, well, we have 3 attempts here. We have 3 pieces of data that we can look at and we can try and study and get some insight into what's going wrong here. Now, Jessie's journey was unfortunate in that she signed up with a national school that I won't name, and she made it very clear to me the first time we spoke that she never felt like she really had the support she needed. She never felt like the training was very good. She never felt like she had a point of contact, and she never felt like she truly understood any of the tests, the Part 1, the Part 2, and the Part 3. In fact, she told me that she felt like she'd passed her Part 2 despite the poor preparation, despite the lack of support and knowledge and training, and despite the school that she was working with. So she kind of got to a point in her journey where she'd done Part 1, done Part 2, and had been signed off as having had all of her initial training for her Part 3, and so the company that she was working with were insisting that she go on a pink license, and she never felt truly like she really knew what she was doing. She never felt like it was appropriate or safe to start teaching pupils, and she never felt like she'd had any real training, let alone 40 hours worth of initial training to prepare her for teaching real pupils. And so that took a long time, and she was then trying to start again, and she sought support elsewhere, and she was playing catch up. And she was playing catch up by trying to redevelop her knowledge of Part 2 and then redevelop Part 3 and unlearn certain things that had been allowed to develop in the year prior, and develop and learn new positive teaching and coaching techniques. And by this point, she was against the clock. So by the time she actually got on the pink license, she was against the clock, and she was looking down the barrel of 2 years, and she was feeling stressed and anxious about that, as we all do. And before you know it, you're 2 tests down, and you're facing your 3rd and final attempt, and it's a highly anxious situation to be in. And Jessie, I'm really sorry that happened, and I just want you to know that you know more now than you did at this point in your journey before. And as I say, I believe that there's a version of this where you are a fully qualified ADI. I'm really pleased you're going back around. And so let's get into it. So I'm actually going to start with the examiner's feedback on this occasion. So the examiner's feedback is as follows. The PDI was polite and attentive to the pupil throughout the lesson. The lesson plan was not suitable for the pupil's learning requirements, as pupil learning required further support and guidance. Road position and speed on approach to roundabouts was poor and not corrected. Highway code knowledge was weak and opportunities to learn were missed. Nice atmosphere in the car between pupil and PDI. Okay, so let's just very quickly talk about that. I always try and look at the examiner's feedback and ask myself, what are the main 3 things that we're being told here? Well, the first thing is there was a really lovely rapport and relationship in the car with the pupil and the instructor. That's relevant. With the pupil and the trainer, yeah. The second thing is highway code knowledge was not where it should have been, and that needs improvement. Well, that kind of syncs up with what Jessie has told me, in that she never truly felt like she had the right training from the off in part 1 and part 2, despite having been successful in those tests. And the lesson plan was not suitable for the pupil's learning requirements, as the pupil learning required further support and guidance. Road position and speed and approach to roundabouts was poor and not corrected. So the atmosphere was nice, the rapport was good, theoretical knowledge was not so good, and there were learning needs that went unaddressed. Approach to the roundabout speed was too much, didn't get fixed. The position on approach to roundabouts was poor and did not get corrected. And there were times where the pupil was asking questions and needing information, and we weren't able to fill that knowledge because of the lack of highway code knowledge. So they're the 3 things that the examiner is telling us. Not enough highway code knowledge, things going wrong that weren't being corrected and developed, and a lovely rapport. So I go to Jessie's feedback, and this is what she had to say. Jessie said, in my opinion, the lesson wasn't terrible, but I did miss some learning opportunities, being that the student's position on roundabouts, I just didn't see it. She said, in regards to the weak highway code knowledge remarks, I actually felt like I knew the answer, but in the moment I was afraid to stop the car and discuss and find the answers with my pupil, and I didn't feel like I could do it on the move, because all I had in my head was the keep the car moving, keep the wheels moving, going on and on and on. Ultimately, the biggest reason for all of this was purely my anxiety. I was worried. There were areas within my route that were absolutely flooded, and each time there was a silence in the car, I was fighting myself to stay calm. But despite all of this, I do feel like the pupil had improved. I just need to remind myself that I can still help develop pupils even when I'm not at my best. And Jessie signed off by saying, going forwards, I obviously now know that I just need to stay calm, and it's okay to stop the car and develop and find the information if needs be. So let's talk about that. Jessie, it's a difficult test. It is. It's a difficult test. It's stressful. It's anxiety inducing. It's never easy having somebody watch you, cross-examine you, judge you. We've all done that thing where we're typing on a keyboard and somebody starts watching us over our shoulder, and suddenly we lose the ability to spell or type, something we've been doing since we were young. So we can all relate to having somebody watch you. I'll be honest with you, Jessie, it sounds to me like the biggest thing that went wrong here for you was anxiety. There was too much going on in your head. And it created what I would call like a messy brain, and you just weren't on your A game. And do you know what? None of that really matters too much if you can still manage to claw back some kind of resolution when things are going wrong. But I think it sounds like you were in such a bad headspace that you were missing fundamental things. You were missing approach speed to roundabouts and positioning. And you were in your head. You say it in your comments. Every time there was a silence, I was berating myself, trying to stay calm. In those moments where nothing was going on necessarily, you're berating yourself. So I can only imagine what's going on when you are dealing with things. It's tough. It's really tough, because it's easy for me to sit here and say, well, just stay calm. But I feel very strongly about this. We all have a responsibility to know our limits. We all have a responsibility to know now is the time to stop trying to plan everything. Now is the time to just pause and relax. Jessie, in your case, I know that 24 hours before your test, you were in a hugely emotional state. And Jessie, we had a conversation where I advised to you that I think that it's time for you to stop trying to plan everything. You've done the time for planning. You need to go and find what will work for calming you down, because the biggest problem with you is your headspace. If that means go and have a bath with a glass of wine and a calming playlist or a podcast or read a book or listen to an ebook, if that means spend time with your family, avoid the family, eat junk food or healthy food, if that means go for a run and try and cleanse your system, if that means a cold plunge, if that means... We all have a responsibility to say enough is enough, and I'm no longer helping myself. I'm just suffering in the name of suffering. It's a horrible test. And nothing is going to change because you suffer more. It's going to be a great test if it's going to be a great test. It's going to be a poor test if it's going to be a poor test. But suffering for 2 weeks, 1 week, 1 day on the run-up, there comes a time where you say, I've just got to try and realign so that I can do my fundamental job. And Jessie, it sounds like you weren't able to because you had this messy brain and you weren't able to do your fundamental job. And as a result, when things were going wrong, it doesn't sound like I actually agree. You said at the start of this message, I don't actually think it was a terrible lesson. The examiner's comments don't suggest a terrible lesson either. They just say that there were fundamental things that were going missed. Yeah? And you can't get away with that in this test. So I agree with you. I think the examiner's comments are the same. It wasn't a terrible lesson. But fundamentally, there were things that were going wrong that were not going addressed. There were learning opportunities that were not facilitated. And that's our bottom line job. And I think that, Jessie, it feels to me like, I know how tough this test is, and it feels to me like you've just got yourself in a real mess, emotionally and mentally, and it's meant that you couldn't do your job. And I wish that had been different for you. But I want this to be a really clear point to all of you. You can have an off day, but if you can fundamentally see faults and make them better, that is almost always going to give you a great chance of success. But if you fundamentally fail to do that, it's going to be very difficult. Now, Jessie says something else that's really interesting as well. She said that she didn't actually feel like she had poor highway code knowledge necessarily in relation to what went down, but she felt like she couldn't discuss those conversations on the move effectively. But she had this idea that I can't stop the car, the wheels have to be moving for a minimum amount of time. Now, just in case some of you don't know, that comes from during the pandemic. There were rules that were kind of strictly in place. The wheels must be moving for a minimum amount of time throughout the test. Whilst that is still kind of echoed, the emphasis and the exact wording has been slightly eased. And so these days it's more about, we've got a 45-minute test, okay? It's a short test. You have to showcase 17 competencies in 45 minutes. That's difficult. And so what they're saying is, we don't want to waste time unnecessarily with having been sat by the side of the road. That's going to eat into your time to showcase real learning. So that's why they have this emphasis on keep the car. We need a lesson where we're actually doing things. I need to be able to see you showcase this. So although it's still, that wording is still the case, it's important to me that you guys all know that the emphasis has twisted a little bit since we get further away from the pandemic, and it's more about let's get on with things. But, and I want to be really clear about this, yes, there is still this kind of wording about keeping the car moving. But if you, or more importantly, your pupil, cannot have the conversations that they need to have so that they can learn and improve, stop the car. clearly, if you have an opportunity where you can have a conversation on the move and facilitate learning and things get better, if you can do that on the move, if you and your pupil, more importantly, can cope with that on the move, I want you to do it on the move. But if they can't cope, stop the car. I would far rather you eat into that time, that precious time, have a conversation that's effective and impactful between you and pupil, and then we go and do it. And then the rest of the time thereafter is more effective. So yes, I don't want you sitting at the side of the road without the wheels moving for a long period of time or unnecessarily. But if your pupil, especially the pupil, cannot cope with that conversation, stop the car and do it. Have the conversation. It just becomes a problem if it's unnecessary, could have been avoided, or for unnecessary amounts of time. And it's very clear. It's far easier, by the way, when you're sat in the back. We can see, okay, you can't blag it. We can see it. I can sit in the back and I'm not having to deal with anything that you guys are having to deal with when you're driving or coaching. I can see when your pupil can cope with that conversation. So, Jessie, I just feels to me like there was a lot of kind of messy brain space going on. And I hope that you can see that now. And I hope that as you go back around again, you'll appreciate the importance of preparation is crucial, but there comes a time where you just need to clear your mind and just think, let's go for it. Okay, moments of silence are okay. You can stop the car if you need to, if it's appropriate, and just make the faults go away. Okay, that's it. That's all the examiner is saying that they haven't seen enough of so far. Now, we're going to look at some scores, but I'm going to do this a little bit different, because when Jessie told me that she had failed 3 attempts, I thought, well, we've got 3 points of data there. Let's talk about that. Let's look at that. And I'm going to talk to you about some of the feedback that Jessie has had from all 3 tests, because there's something really interesting going on here. I'm not going to read word for word because I don't want this to become just an attack on Jessie over 3 tests, but just listen to some of the stuff that I pick out here. The first attempt that Jessie had in a part 3 test was some comments that I picked up was, a second, let me find it for you. I'm just trying to make sure I've got the right ones. Forgive me. Examiner says that there was issues with cutting the corner. It was identified but not dealt with as the pupil continued to cut corners. In fact, the same corner. The examiner said that there was a pleasant environment in the car, and the examiner said that there were situations that were safety critical that didn't get dealt with. So basically what the examiner said, pleasant environment in the car, situations that haven't been dealt with, and even when you have identified faults, we haven't made them better because that fault continued. Now let me take you to the second attempt. I'm just going to read not word for word, but I'm going to read some snippets. Examiner said on the second attempt, pupil got close to some parked vehicles when meeting traffic. This needed guidance, and it didn't get it. Hold back position on meeting situations was too close, didn't go addressed. Normal driving position, again, pupil was driving too far over to the left, it wasn't addressed. Guidance was needed, and it wasn't there. And at the end, nice rapport with pupil. So again, notice that examiner has identified there are issues here that are not being addressed, but there's a wonderful rapport in the car, basically. Thirdly, and the third attempt, as you've already heard, PDI was polite and attentive to the pupil's needs throughout the lesson. The lesson was not suitable as the pupil's learning requirements basically required further support and guidance. There were issues that went unaddressed, so approach speed to roundabouts and road positioning. And then the examiner signs off by saying, really nice atmosphere in the car between pupil and PDI. 3 times we've heard the same thing. 3 times. Wonderful rapport. So Jessie, I take my hat off to you. 3 times an examiner has said, you've got a brilliant rapport in the car. There's a lovely atmosphere. I love to be a part of it. But 3 times they have said, you are fundamentally not identifying faults. You are fundamentally not picking up on things that are going wrong and making them better. That's it. Fault ID, identifying faults, and make them go away. That's pretty much my overall feedback to you, Jessie. I feel very strongly about that. And then look at this. I actually went one step further and looked at the scores because I wanted to see if there are comparisons in the scores. Now, let's just talk about lesson planning, the first section within the Part 3 test. Lesson planning. On Jessie's first attempt, she got a 2, a 1, a 2, and a 1. So 2, 1, 2, 1. On Jessie's second attempt, she got a 1, 1, 2, 1. Almost the same. And on Jessie's third attempt, a 1, 1, 2, 1. So, over 3 tests, Jessie has got almost identical scores just in lesson planning. 1, 1, 2, 1 happened twice, and I think it was a 2, 1, 2, 1 on one occasion. Let's just look at those competencies. So the first one, did the trainer identify the pupil's learning goals and needs? Twice she got a 1, and on one occasion she got a 2. 3 times an examiner is saying that the trainer did not identify the pupil's learning goals and needs. That is either going to be that the focus was not the appropriate focus, or when there should have been a new focus, it wasn't now addressed. 3 times Jessie got a 1 on was the agreed lesson structure appropriate to the pupil's experience and ability. Jessie wasn't meeting their needs. The structure of the lesson wasn't appropriate. It was either, well, I believe that that's because there are needs that are being presented and Jessie is not dealing with them. On 3 occasions, Jessie got a score of, it's actually the one competency within lesson planning that Jessie got a 2 on consistently, and that was were practice areas suitable, which, you know, that's positive, but 3 times an examiner has felt like at no point were the practice areas suitable. And again, is it any wonder? Because you are not meeting your pupil's needs, you are not seeing faults, and so you're not picking up on these faults, and so you're not fixing them, and so you're not adapting where you go, the practice areas, to tackle those faults. So how can they give you a 3? And then the 4th and final within lesson planning was the lesson plan adapted when appropriate to help the pupil work towards their learning goals and needs. Well, we're not seeing the faults in the first place, and so how could we possibly adapt our teaching to focus on that? Exactly how you do it depends. Sometimes you might say, well, actually, I've seen this new fault, and I can do that whilst I stick to my original plan. And other times you might say, oh, I need to drop the original plan and do this for like 5 minutes. Maybe you drop the original plan for the rest of the lesson and deal with this for the rest of the lesson. Whatever that looks like, it depends. But if you're not seeing the faults, Jessie, you can never fix them. And then you don't adapt, and then you don't adjust your teaching areas. And so ultimately, I go back to the first question, you did not identify the pupil's learning goals and needs. And so the structure was not appropriate to the pupil's experience and ability. That's just the first 4 competencies. That's the first 4 competencies within the 17 competencies. And they're identical almost across 3 tests. So Jessie, it's getting dark, sorry. Jessie, let me be clear about this. I'm so sorry that you had the journey you had, and I wish that I could say that you were a rare case, but unfortunately we're seeing more and more of these journeys where people are not being supported properly. I'm so thrilled that you're going around again, and I believe that there's a version of this where you can become an ADI. I do. I truly do. I believe that you know more now. Well, you have to know more now than you did this time round. And so you give yourself that head start on where you were before. But please make sure, Jessie, please make sure that as you go back around, you ensure that you focus on your fault ID. So seeing the faults and then putting them right, make them go away. You're not going to be able to identify faults if your knowledge of proper driving standards is not good. And so that you can see where that fits into part 2. You can also see where that fits into part 1. So please don't start thinking about fault ID as something I'm going to start tackling when I get to part 3. It starts now. It starts right away. It starts part 1, learning the theory, learning the standard of acceptable levels theoretically. Part 2, I'm going to demonstrate that I know those standards in my own driving. And part 3 is an assessment of my ability to teach those standards and pass on knowledge. Fault ID is definitely what I think that you need to work on, as demonstrated across the three tests that you've got. Now, I will say this before I sign off, because it's going to get very dark very soon. On 3 occasions, Jessie, your risk management has had a passable and acceptable score. You're not allowing your lessons to get dangerous. You are keeping your lessons safe. You are achieving a minimum standard within that expectation. The lessons are safe. That's a good thing. You are clearly having a wonderful rapport with your pupils. That's been highlighted enough. But fault ID, identifying the faults, seeing what their needs are at any moment, and having a clear headspace is so, so important. And I really, really hope that having explained that to you over the course of 3 tests, I really hope that that will help you as you go back through your journey. Not just when you get to part 3. This all matters right now, okay? This all matters from part 1, okay? Thank you all for watching. I hope that that helps, and I'm sure I'll speak to you all very, very soon.